Chapter 1. The Code Stream. Dr. Marlon was a promising young psychiatrist, known for his sharp mind and calm demeanor. He had spent years sitting on the right side of the chair, helping his clients conquer their challenges. He was the healer, the one with the answers. But everything began to unravel when he took on the case of Sylvester, a brilliant but troubled computer scientist who had been plagued by vivid hallucinations for years, as mentioned in his record. Sylvester's condition baffled every expert who had examined him. He insisted he was completely all right, that he wasn't hearing voices like his therapists claimed, or seeing things that weren't there in the conventional sense. Instead, he claimed he perceived the world differently, a mixture of physical reality as experienced by everyone, but in addition, he regularly saw the world as a series of streams of digital code. A tree wasn't a tree, but a pattern of shifting binaries. A book wasn't made of pages and words, it was a dense, fluid cascade of zeros and ones, flowing rapidly and endlessly, unique to each object yet strangely stable and coherent. Everything has its code, Sylvester would say with eerie certainty. I just see it. Despite months of therapy, nothing about Sylvester's behavior changed. He remained composed, logical, even serene. If anything, his perception seemed to provide him with a form of internal order, as though he were accessing a level of reality others simply couldn't comprehend. But then something unexpected began to happen. Dr. Marlon started seeing it too. At first, it was subtle, a flicker of numbers across the corner of a chair, or the shifting pulse of digits in a colleague's eyes. He dismissed it as stress, a projection from spending too much time immersed in Sylvester's world. However, the visions grew more substantial and more frequent. Books no longer looked like books. Instead, they pulsed with steady flows of binary patterns, almost beautiful in their consistency. People, too, carried streams of shimmering data, moving around them like a digital aura. He was no longer observing Sylvester's condition. He was experiencing it. The line between doctor and patient blurred. Was it empathy gone too far? A psychosomatic echo? Or was Sylvester right all along, that he wasn't delusional, just differently wired, tapping into a reality others were blind to? Now on the other side of the chair, Dr. Marlon had to confront a chilling possibility. Perhaps the mind doesn't betray us with hallucinations, perhaps it reveals what has been hidden all along. And if that were true, what else had they all been blind to? The change in Dr. Marlon didn't take long to echo through the sterile halls of the Psychiatric Institute. Colleagues who once praised his clarity and professionalism now avoided meeting his gaze. He had started to behave oddly. During morning rounds, he often stared too long at everyday objects, door handles, plants, even people, as if trying to read something hidden beneath their surface. Words came slower. Sentences sometimes trailed off. And when he did speak, his language had shifted, laced with unfamiliar terms and inexplicable analogies, the code behind the skin, digital currents in the iris, looping syntax of sorrow. Whispers began. Notes were written. By Thursday afternoon, he was summoned. The message came plainly: please report to the office of the medical director at 3 p.m. sharp. No context. None required. He made his way there slowly, passing long windows streaked with sunlight. One, near the end of the hall, stood open. A breeze stirred the air. Then he saw it, a bee, drifting just beyond the frame. But he didn't see it as others would. Not as an insect. Not as life in motion. He saw a string. A delicate golden thread spiraling behind the creature-like vapor. It shimmered with radiant, ordered pulses, 01001, 100, 1110, a sequence of digital code twisting in the air, intricate and alive. It moved with such precision that he could feel its logic. Hear its hum. Unconsciously, he stopped walking. His lips parted, and a low murmur escaped. 0, 1, 1, 0, 0, 1. The numbers came unbidden, reverent, his voice like a child whispering a sacred chant. He didn't notice the intern passing by. Didn't see the look of alarm. The bee danced in the light, and he streamed along with it. When he arrived at the medical director's office, he was 5 minutes late. The director, a woman known more for discipline than compassion, didn't look up from her folder as he entered. "Sit," she said. He obeyed. "You've been observed behaving erratically," she said, flipping a page. Hallucinations. Dissociative moments. Unusual language. Frankly, Dr. Marlon, your conduct over the last week has raised serious concerns about your capacity to function as a physician. He leaned forward slightly, hands folded but trembling. His voice was calm but urgent. "You're looking at this all wrong," he said. "This isn't a breakdown. It's a breakthrough." The director raised an eyebrow. "I'm seeing the architecture behind reality," he continued. "The patterns beneath what we call perception. What Sylvester sees, it's not madness. It's clarity. And now I see it too. And I think, instead of condemning it, maybe we should learn from it." She opened her mouth to interrupt, but he pressed on. "Can you imagine what it would mean if everyone could perceive things this way? No more confusion. No more guessing what something is, or who someone is. No more masks. Just essence. Truth in its most direct form. Objects revealing their nature. People, code you can trust." His voice had grown more passionate, his eyes shone brightly. "It's not a disorder," he said softly. "It's a kind of vision. A way out of the fog." The director sat still for a long moment. Then she closed the folder. Her expression did not soften. "Dr. Marlon, you are describing a delusional system. With conviction. With structure. Which makes it all the more serious." He blinked. "But you sound just like your patient. You are becoming your patient." Silence. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your clinical duties. And I am referring you for psychiatric evaluation with Dr. Caswell. You will attend the appointment. That is not a suggestion. Understood?" Dr. Marlon sat there, stunned. He wanted to protest further, to explain again, to show her. But no words came. Only numbers. Only light. Only that beautiful, spiraling code. Behind her, through the glass, the bee was gone. But the string remained. Chapter 2. Translation. Weeks later. Neither Dr. Marlon nor his former patient, Sylvester, showed signs of improvement. Their behavior grew more insular and synchronized, as if they were evolving along the same invisible pathway. They spoke in cryptic terms, exchanged numerical murmurs, and often slipped into long, shared silences. Their therapists observed, concerned. Their peers watched, confused. But only Dr. Caswell dared act. He concluded they were becoming a danger, not through aggression, but detachment. "They've stopped operating in our reality," he told the clinical board. "It's not psychosis in the usual sense, it's an immersion into a world no one else can access." In a quiet session, Dr. Caswell presented Dr. Marlon with a choice. "You know the rule," he said. "If you admit yourself voluntarily, you retain a measure of control. If we commit you, you surrender that right. You taught this once." Marlon stared at the floor for a long time, then nodded. "Voluntarily," he said. Sylvester too. Sylvester needed no convincing. When they met the next morning, he simply said, "I know. Let's go." The rehab center was tucked away in a wooded area outside the city, a repurposed monastery with high ceilings, drafty halls, and long windows that opened into silence. The patients were varied people with genuine struggles and far-reaching pain. Elena, a violinist with bipolar disorder and scars she never spoke of. Marcus, a veteran whose silence was more profound than trauma. Kira, an actress who sometimes believed she was still on stage. Thomas, a preacher, was convinced an angel made of butterfly wings had taken residence in his mind. Among them, Marlon and Sylvester didn't stand out. They belonged. And it was there, in the quiet of their chosen confinement, that they made their discovery. Dr. Marlon devoted his time to refining his ability to read the stream. What once seemed like chaos now had cadence, logic, and structure. He learned to anticipate shifts in the binary, to recognize emotional resonance in the rhythm. Sylvester, the engineer, had already mastered the art of code reading. But he turned his attention to new goals, something more profound. He began studying the patterns emanating from the people around them. Not just impressions, but precise, measurable data. A patient's stream while laughing. A nurse's stream while writing notes. The code of a handshake, a glance, a sudden outburst. He recorded everything. Over weeks, he and Marlon analyzed streams from 10 patients and 10 staff members. This observational study, informal, unapproved, but meticulously executed, revealed something astonishing. A pattern. Among the patients, each stream displayed the same recurring phenomenon, a long, uninterrupted sequence of zeros, roughly 1,000 in length, appearing multiple times, often at moments of emotional strain or cognitive dissonance. Among the 10 staff members, only one showed even a partial fragment of the same anomaly. The rest had consistent, flowing, dynamic code streams with no extended silences, no 0000 dead zones. It's not randomness, Sylvester said. It's absence. A rupture in structure. A flaw, or maybe a cry for help written in the code itself. Or a scar, Marlon added. The digital fingerprint of suffering. They didn't understand what caused the anomaly, but they were certain it mattered. It wasn't a hallucination. It was a signature. Dr. Marlon suggested they publish the preliminary results in a small psychiatric journal. Sylvester objected. They won't see it, he said. Not the way we do. They won't believe it. We need to translate it into their world. So, they began a second project. Sylvester envisioned a machine, something simple yet powerful, that could pick up the code as they did and render it visible to non-code readers. Using scrap electronics, outdated EEG kits, repurposed hospital monitors, and open-source signal processing software, they worked in the shadows of the rehab therapy lab. They coded deep into the night, redesigning sensors, calibrating frequencies, and reworking algorithms over and over again. What they were doing bordered on obsession, but it was also a necessity. Weeks passed. The machine, an elegant, helmet-like neural interface, began to take shape. It was designed to pick up the brain's streaming signals and convert them into a visible output on a small OLED display. At first, the display was static. Then jittery. Then inconsistent. But slowly, the stream began to stabilize. Patterns emerged. And then, one evening, as a test patient walked by the projection screen, there it was. The same string of zeros. Clear. Repeated. Precise. They tested again. And again. With different patients. Different times of day. Different emotional states. The result was consistent. When they finally calibrated the device perfectly, Dr. Marlon stared at the display with wide, wet eyes. It's the same, he whispered. Exactly the same. He saw the flowing digits they had both perceived internally for months. The same pulses. The same shimmering threads. Now visible to anyone willing to look. Now, finally, the invisible was visible. We can make them see, Sylvester said, eyes glowing with quiet triumph. This is what I've seen for years. Now, they can too. And perhaps, Marlon thought, the world would stop calling it madness. And start calling it what it truly was. A new way to see. They celebrated quietly that night with a glass of sparkling cider. Alcohol was prohibited in the rehab center, but this moment called for something. They clinked their plastic cups under the dim lights of the standard room, not as doctor and patient, or scientist and colleague, but as two explorers who had glimpsed the edge of a hidden world. Chapter 3. Demonstration. During the following case review at the rehab center, Dr. Marlon and Sylvester made an unusual request. They asked to be reviewed together. The administration was not at all inclined to satisfy this demand, citing privacy regulations and logistical concerns. The standard meeting room was too small to accommodate both sets of clinical staff, let alone the two patients at once. But Marlon and Sylvester insisted. Repeatedly. Calmly. Persistently. Eventually, the administration relented, on the condition that both men sign multiple waivers releasing the facility from liability, citing the unconventional nature of the arrangement. The meeting was relocated to the center's small auditorium, which had been converted into a movie theater, where residents typically gather for weekend films. Sylvester, ever the tinkerer, had managed to connect their neural interface device to the overhead projector, routing the feed from the OLED screen straight to the big screen. They had one goal: to demonstrate that they weren't broken, delusional, or detached from reality. Instead, they believed they had developed a gifted ability to perceive the world in a deeper, coded dimension. After the routine review of their respective cases, symptom updates, medication logs, behavioral assessments, Dr. Marlon politely asked to extend the session. "We would like," he said, "to show you what we see." The staff exchanged glances. Dr. Caswell gave a wary nod. Sylvester took over. "We'll start with something simple." They began with colors. A red apple. A green plant. A blue blanket. Dr. Caswell, wearing the helmet, was instructed to focus on each item as it was placed in front of him. As he concentrated, the projector came alive. On the screen, flowing digits. Unique binary patterns for each color. Precise, repeatable, consistent. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Therapists, nurses, and residents leaned forward. Then came objects. A comb. A ceramic mug. A pair of reading glasses. Each one triggered a distinct code signature, unique, stable, reproducible. Then they moved to words. Sylvester read aloud simple phrases. Love. Fear. Hope. Again, the projector responded. Complex, shifting sequences appeared, richer and more intricate than those for colors or objects. Emotions encoded in syntax. Patterns born of voice, meaning, context. The audience was silent now. Focused. And finally, they demonstrated facial expressions. A nurse volunteered. She smiled. She frowned. She looked confused. Each shift brought a corresponding wave of binary to the screen. Dr. Caswell, though skeptical at first, could no longer hide his fascination. The device was not able to read emotions in the air. It was amplifying what he perceived, converting perception into visible language. When it was over, no one applauded. But no one laughed either. The head of psychiatry cleared his throat. What we've witnessed is unusual. Possibly groundbreaking. However, it is also too novel to be fully interpreted. This doesn't mean you are not in need of psychiatric care. It means our understanding may be incomplete. It wasn't the declaration Marlon and Sylvester had hoped for. But it wasn't dismissal either. It was the beginning. The audience filed out slowly, exchanging glances not of skepticism, but of wonder. And for the first time since arriving, the two men felt something that had long eluded them. They had been heard. Chapter 4. Intervention. After celebrating their success with sparkling cider in the standard room, they couldn't get any alcoholic beverages in the facility. Marlon and Sylvester began brainstorming ways to refine and expand their discovery. It was during one of these late-night sessions, as they reviewed the code logs from Isa's most recent episode, that Sylvester paused. "These zeros aren't just gaps," he said, staring at the string on the monitor. "They're broken numbers. Like corrupted code that doesn't know how to be anything but silent." Marlon leaned in. "So not just absence?" "Worse," Sylvester said. "They distort the stream around them. Other patterns collapse when they hit this zone. I've started calling them," he hesitated, then added, "schizophrenic numbers." Marlon's eyes narrowed. "Like fragmented thought, splitting perception. Dissolving structure." "Exactly. They're not zeros in the binary sense. They're zero with gravity. They eat everything near them, meaning, memory, attention. They act like black holes in the stream." They both sat back, watching the sequence pulse on the screen. The term fit. It wasn't diagnostic, it was descriptive. Not meant to pathologize, but to name what no other language could yet explain. With a new sense of purpose and cautious support from the facility, they requested permission from the staff to observe patients before and after treatment. Their proposal was simple: compare the digital code streams of patients during medicated and non-medicated states. Using the known half-lives of prescribed psychotropic medications, they timed their observations precisely, recording code data when medication was at its peak concentration in the bloodstream, and again when levels were low or absent. The results were astonishing. As the medication levels peaked, the patient's behavior visibly improved, but more remarkably, the long streams of zeros in their code began to shrink or disappear altogether. In several cases, the anomaly vanished completely at full dosage. The code returned to fluidity, complexity, and continuity. The staff, initially skeptical, could no longer ignore the consistency of the findings. The project had moved far beyond theory. Dr. Marlon and Sylvester were no longer seen as patients. They were now researchers. The rehab administration provided them with a small office in the west wing of the facility, as well as upgraded equipment, access to select patient files, and clearance to observe more cases. They co-authored an abstract summarizing their preliminary findings, which was accepted for presentation at a regional psychiatric symposium, under the institutional banner of the center itself. But their greatest challenge came in the form of Isa. Her real name was Isabel, but everyone knew her as Isa. Young, brilliant, and deeply troubled, she had a background in astrophysics and a long history of psychiatric admissions. Her hallucinations were severe and unrelenting. At times, near-toxic doses of haloperidol were required just to calm her long enough to speak. She was a frequent visitor to the rehab center and a tragic figure within its walls. "What if," Dr. Marlon mused one afternoon, "we could interrupt the zero stream? What if we could replace it with something else?" Sylvester gave it a few minutes of careful thought. "Technically," he said slowly, "it's possible. Difficult. Maybe dangerous. But not impossible." They began studying Isa's code intensely. Patterns emerged at times of day when the zero strings were most active, triggers that seemed to amplify them, and moments of lucidity when the pattern briefly broke. After testing several small interventions, sound patterns, visual cues, and deep thought prompts, they found one approach that consistently made a difference: interruption through cognitive redirection. Whenever the string of zeros began to form in Isa's stream, they would redirect her focus, prompting her to engage in a specific activity or challenging thought. Surprisingly, it worked. Almost every time, the zero stream was disrupted, broken, or reshaped. Encouraged by the success, Sylvester took it a step further. He created a compact sensor and pulse emitter device, worn as a bracelet, that could detect the early formation of the zero string. When detected, it delivered a light pulse or prick, a subtle physical sensation designed to jolt the mind out of passivity and force engagement. It wasn't a cure. But it was a breakthrough. Isa responded well. Her episodes became fewer and shorter. Her code is more consistent. Her voice, once frayed and scattered, began to return with clarity. And at that moment, standing on the edge of what once seemed madness, Dr. Marlon and Sylvester realized they might have found something scarce. A way not only to understand the code, but to reshape it. Chapter 5, Fixing the Code. Months later. The device worked. Not perfectly, but consistently. Isa's episodes became manageable. A few others benefited, too. Word began to spread, not in headlines or journals, but in whispered conversations at psychiatric conferences and quiet referrals from one center to another. Sylvester called it the code stabilizer. Dr. Marlon preferred a simpler name, the listener. Because that's what it did, really, it listened to thoughts. To structure. To silence. It caught the zeros before they swallowed everything. One morning, the rehab director invited them to her office. There, on the desk, was a manila folder, government-branded. A research foundation had taken notice of their work. Funding might follow. So might scrutiny. You realize, she said cautiously, this isn't just science anymore. This is ethics. Philosophy. Control. Marlon nodded. And empathy. They never forgot that it started with madness, misunderstood, feared, ignored. But in that madness was a deeper signal. A hidden language. A system not broken but operating on a frequency no one had thought to tune into. Until now. In their final report, Sylvester included one quiet line, buried in an appendix. Mental illness may not always be a dysfunction of thought, but a misalignment of perception. What we call delusion might, in rare cases, be the mind's attempt to access a deeper order. Not chaos. Code. That line would later be quoted across the world. Dr. Marlon eventually returned to public practice, not as a psychiatrist, but as a researcher of consciousness. Sylvester didn't disappear. Instead, he set off on a journey around the world, speaking at universities, meditation centers, tech summits, and psychiatric hospitals. His mission was simple, but profound, to teach people how to see the code. Not just in machines, but in themselves. In others. In the quiet layers beneath everything. Later, Sylvester and Marlon made one final, startling discovery. The string of zeros, once thought to be markers of illness, were actually present in everyone. They existed at the core of our mental code, dormant, like a waiting signal. What differed between individuals wasn't the presence of these zeros, but the systems the mind had in place to suppress them. These suppression mechanisms, they realized, were tied directly to consciousness itself. The more conscious and engaged the mind, the quicker it silenced the zeros before they could expand. But even minor lapses in control, stress, trauma, chemical imbalance, allowed the strings to grow, to destabilize, to manifest. That manifestation, they concluded, was what we called mental illness. In a way, they theorized, even sleep allowed the zeros to rise, but harmlessly. Dreams, nightmares, and slumber became redefined not as escapes from reality, but as natural, non-dysfunctional brushes with this latent stream. Controlled exposures. Safe dances with chaos. They also came to understand why isolation often led to mental deterioration. Without interaction, without engagement with others, the mind lacked the stimuli it needed to keep the zeros at bay. Social connection, they realized, was not just emotional support, it was neurological maintenance. Interaction sharpened consciousness. Isolation dulled it. And in that dullness, the zeros multiplied. They also reevaluated the brutal efficacy of electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, once feared, often misunderstood. What ECT did, they theorized, was forcefully disrupt the zero stream at its most invasive point. It didn't heal, but it crushed the zeros before they could take root. In some cases, it worked. In others, it left behind different forms of damage. But it confirmed their belief, even the most controversial treatments had been unknowingly fighting the same hidden signal all along. And Isa? She moved to a quiet apartment outside the city. She still wore the bracelet. But these days, it rarely buzzed. She had started painting again. The first canvas she completed was simple, just rows of tiny, shifting binary numbers, painted in quiet blues and pale golds. She titled it, Signal Acquired. As computer science increasingly hands the reins of humanity to machines, to code, to neural networks, our own neurological code lies dormant. The brain, capable of perceiving the raw reality beneath the surface illusion, has grown complacent. We build machines to see for us, to decide for us. But the original interface, the human mind, has always been ready. We just forgot how to look. And those who dared to look, those who glimpsed the raw stream beneath the surface, were diagnosed with mental illnesses and locked into small rooms. Not because they were broken, but because they were ahead of schedule. Early birds. Because they saw something the rest of us weren't ready to envision.
Author's note on AI assistance. I wrote this book collaboratively with an AI language model, ChatGPT. I began by drafting my own ideas, scenes, and narrative direction, and then I used AI-generated suggestions to expand and refine the text. I reviewed, edited, and shaped every passage until it fully aligned with my creative intent. While AI served as a helpful writing tool, the voice, story, and final decisions are entirely my own. John Gary Cantov.